Welcome to another exciting tutorial with Bobby Davidson, the founder of Foundry. And we are going to build a project that you probably have seen a lot out there, a weather app. A lot of code camps use this as one of their projects. And we thought what we would do is put our own spin on it and take it up a little bit further than you normally see. And this is why we're calling it WeatherPro, a JavaScript project. We are going to use the darksky API, which is very popular, very accurate. If you haven't heard of it, it's probably one of the best weather APIs out there today. And we're going to use reverse geolocating to get our location from the Google Maps API. So we're going to actually be calling two APIs. Now, when we're building these projects, one thing that you must know about Foundry, if you've been looking at our projects, is we do spend a lot of time on the API. So let me show you what we're going to build today. And then I'm going to go through real quickly how this is structured. So this is WeatherPro, and you can see here we have our temperature here, our location here in the great state of North Carolina. Kernersville, North Carolina is kind of where Foundry is. Home of barbecue, it's great. And then we have here, today is Tuesday, August 27th, and it is raining a little bit of drizzle. Now, down here we have our forecast area. And so the forecast hourly, we can get the next 8 hours. With darksky API, you can get up to 48 hours or 168 hours by the hour for the forecast. And then we have weekly, and this is done by the day, and we're doing the conditions and the high and the low. And then over here we have the precipitation chance. It is going to rain today. If you were in North Carolina, humidity is 92% and the winds are 2 miles per hour. All right, so that's my best weathercast there. And so we also have this cool title in here. We're using something you may not have seen before, some CSS styling to put a border around the text to make us kind of a hero text. And that is kind of our layout. We also have this really nice full background, and it is responsive. So like if you squeeze it down, it's going to be responsive, and we're using Bootstrap for that. So all pretty cool. What I thought I would do is, we get a lot of comments about why do we spend so much time on the UI. And this is our theory on this. If you're going to put something on your portfolio, it should look great. And we try our best to make our apps on the UI side look a little bit better than, say, just a blank page with 67 degrees in the middle of it on black, you know? And so like what we want to do is show you how you would actually build a full-blown weather app using these APIs. And then it's something worthy to stick on your portfolio. So let's look at kind of the structure of our UI before we start building it. So this is Weather API here, and I've got a little presentation I want to show you here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build a row here, and this is going to be, we're going to use a style, or it's going to be called WP title. And WP title, if you look in our CSS, will control the style for this row. And then we make another row with two columns, a column on the left and a column on the right. We're dividing that in half, and that's called WP current, and that's what we're going to name that there. And then we're going to make a third row with two columns, and that's going to be controlled by WP conditions, so the name here, and then WP forecast will be the name here. And then we'll reference those names in our style sheet to get the style we want. And finally, we have a fourth row, and that's called WP footer, which holds our attribution to darksky, which is required, and learn to code at Foundry. And that could be your portfolio or reach out to you or whatever you want to do there. So that is how we're going to build this. And I hope that you stick around for this, but let's jump into VS Code and let's look at the front end. And after that, we'll look at the JavaScript to do that. And then at the very end of that, we're going to talk about where do we go next as far as like security and those kind of things when you're trying to secure these keys on the back end of this. And so let's jump into the code of WeatherPro. All right, so let's just jump into VS Code here, and let's check out the code and see what we can do to build this. So what I've got here, I've got a project that I've already started, and inside this project in VS Code, I've got an index file. I've got all of my images in here. I did some stuff with my fave icon as well, but a lot of them is just some images here we're using to display the type of weather that's that the image will kind of correspond with the type of weather, whether it's rainy, sunny, moon, night, whatever. So you'll get all of these images inside our code, and you can go get this code at our public GitHub, Coder Foundry public GitHub, and you can look for WeatherPro and find it and download the project. So you get the complete portion of this code. This is our index file. We're going to be on one page today. And then I have a style sheet, and we're going to go through these styles as we go through. There's actually quite a bit of CSS in this. And then we've got our weather.js and then our keys.js. And what I did is I'm storing my keys in a separate JavaScript file. And then that's in my git ignore so that it's not published up in the public repo so that you don't get access to your keys. And so if you're publishing this on your public Git, this is a technique that you can use to make sure your keys aren't just out there for everyone to see. However, if you're using this and you're just calling these APIs from in the browser, just realize you're broadcasting the key over the public internet anyway, so it's not a secure way to do that, and we'll address that as we go. But let's look at the front end first, and let's just go through it. So what I've got here is just a simple Bootstrap document that I have put together. So I'm using Bootstrap as my layout, and then I've got a header thing in here. And so like you can see here, I'm referencing the style sheet that's going to drive the look and feel for WeatherPro. And then I have a lot of my fav icons. You can go to fav icon generators if you need one, and but this, all that's doing is making sure that it works on all platforms. And then I've got my key.js and my weather.js, and this is where we'll actually call all of our code for the APIs and set the values inside of our front end. And then this is kind of my Bootstrap CSS. And then these are the optional with jQuery and Bootstraps that come when you install Bootstrap. So I've got a min.js, a popper, and I've got my jQuery in here. Not really using those except for this one, but I just kind of included it just because that's kind of what we have. All right, so in here I've set up a body tag, and I've put a style on this body tag. So let's look at that first, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take this out of here so we can see kind of what it's doing. And so now I've just got a body tag and an empty div. And this is going to be the basis of it. And so in here, what we're doing is we're setting a linear gradient background, and we're setting height to 100%, and then we also have a default fallback color of just a light blue. And this goes well with that weather background. In case the cover doesn't exactly work in every scenario, this is our fallback. So if you look at that, it should look relatively bland and pretty simple. And I'm going to show you some stages so you can see kind of how it works. So we should just have a default page that's just got some kind of blue on it. Okay, so nothing major here, and it's got an index, and it's got our title, and that's our fav icon there. Okay, so that's kind of cool. But when we add this class, and the class is WPBackground, you can see what happens here. And what this is going to do is add in our image to the background and make it a cover image so that it completely displays over the whole browser. And what it's doing is it makes it responsive too. So as you can see, it's kind of scaling around as I move it around. Kind of neat. Okay? And so that's our cover image. So that's our background that you saw when we were setting this up. Okay? So what I'm going to do now is, let's look at the CSS real quick. And so if you look at this, it's height, VH, which stands for view height, 100%. It's got a minimum height of 500 pixels. And then I set the background image to that weather prop BG, and it's no repeat, center fixed. And this is how it's displaying, how it's going to center it on the page. And then I have these other fallbacks saying, hey, cover this, WebKit, Mazo, and then a background size of cover, so that it covers it on all the platforms. And that's all that does. Is pretty simple to make an image cover the complete background. So Pretty cool, pretty easy to do. So let's keep moving. All right. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add in my first row. Okay. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a couple things first. All right. I'm going to add a div in here. And this is going to make sure that this, this flex box makes a big column in the middle of our page. All right. And then inside that, I'm going to put a container to kind of center this on the page. And container is a style out of Bootstrap. And what this is going to do is put me a container that's kind of in the middle of the page. Okay. And I'm calling that WP main, and I'm going to style up WP main in a second here. Okay. Now the first thing I want to do is create a row, as we went through, and a row with my title. So this is my title row, and then we'll go look at it, what it does. So if you don't know, rows in Bootstrap is kind of your primary grid layout function. So you add a class or row, and then you can put columns in here and you can break them. But in general, if you put a call, just COL, it's going to fill up the whole row. And then I have an ID called WP title, and then I have this WeatherPro here. So if I look at it, you can see now we have our WeatherPro title here. And you notice I've got this really cool outline where I stroke the text on the outside. So I can show you real quickly how that looks. So WP title, we'll go down through here and find it. And what I did was I'm loading in a custom font that I did. You can do this. I have an Adobe text kit or font kit, and it allows me to load my fonts in. And so you can do this too. You can change the font whatever you want. I've got some styling in here. I'm using EM weights, so that's more responsive. And then I set up my own colors in here. And I'm using this thing called var to reuse those colors. So let me show you how that kind of works. So this, I just came up with a swatch that I wanted to use for my theme here. And that way that I could stay consistent. And then I use those using the var variable everywhere where I want to use a color. And that's the way my colors stay consistent. And I'm not also constantly trying to go look up what this RGB value is and those kind of things every time I want to use it somewhere else in another style. And then I have the a fill color, which is white, and then I hit this stroke color, and I set it to 1.5, and I make it dark gray RGBA. Okay, and that's what makes that stroke around it. All right, it does fall back where it'll do nothing, and so that's okay, and it'll look dark if it doesn't do anything. Okay, so it'll fall back to this color, and then it'll and then we'll do this if it can. So it'll be dark gray if it doesn't do anything, and it'll be white with a border if it can't. If it can. All right, so that's pretty simple. All right, so that's our title. That's our first row. So we only have 3 to go. So just hang with me. So the next thing that I want to do is create another row out here, okay? So that's going to be inside our WP main. And again, and I'm just doing this just so you can kind of get the flavor of how you put these things together inside of Bootstrap and how easy it is to do. So now I've got this class of row, and then in here, this row is going to be the 2 columns that have the current temperature, the location, and our weather icon. Okay, so what I'm going to do is pull this in, and we'll just go over it. And so again, it's called WP current, and then I have this one here called WP temp. I labeled it, and then I labeled this one called location, so that I could, one, write the location from JavaScript to here, and then style it with my WP temp in here. And WP stands for, and I'm WeatherPro. And then I just kind of put some other div tags in here. And so inside of a column, and column small means this is when it'll start stacking or breaking. These will stack on top of each other as it gets smaller when it can. And so, and in default, in the large one, it actually stacks as well. So like, and I've also got the IDs in here, daytime, summer, and current tip, so that JavaScript can know how to write to these. And I put some default values in there so that you could kind of see what's going on. And then I created another div. So notice that this has a div call and this has a div call. So these will go side by side, and until it gets to the small breakpoint, then they'll stack underneath each other. Okay. And then I have a class here, image fluid, which will make our icon images kind of scale. All right. So now if we look at that, hopefully, yep, we're looking good here. So we have now our 90 degrees, our partly sunny, our location, and these are all defaults. We're not really hitting the API yet. We also have this kind of transparent background. So let's look real quickly in the CSS how that's done. And that's done in WP current. And you can see here, all I did was I have a background color, color's white, which is my font color, and a resize value. And this says gray, blue, RGBA. Now, if you didn't know about colors, RGBA, A stands for alpha channel. And this is really easy to do. This makes this 50% transparent. So it's not opaque, and that's why you can see to the background. Okay? Pretty simple. So now that we've got that, now the next thing you can guess is, let's make another row, okay, inside of WP current. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is create one more row, and this will hold our conditions. All right, and so our conditions will be precipitation, our wind, and then our forecast conditions. So it's pretty neat. And again, we're just doing that with a simple row. So now if you're keeping up with me, I got a row here and a row here. I think I did that right. Actually, we want to put this on the outside. That is wrong. Glad I looked. And we want to close this down right in here. So now we have this row, and then outside that row, we want a row out of that. Okay. So now we have our three rows here. And that's inside this, we're going to put in a little bit of content in here, and we'll walk through it. There's a little bit more to this one, and we'll try to walk through it step by step so that you understand. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to bring in a column called conditions, okay? And conditions is going to hold the precipitation, the humidity, and the wind, okay? And so now that you can see here, I created a row, and then another row, and then another row. And so that these would stack on top of each other, okay? I didn't want them to go left to right. I wanted them to stack because it looked better as it squeezed down. All right. So then the next thing I want to do is get my next column over. So that's inside this row. So I need another column in that. And we're going to call that the forecast row. And it's got a little more content in it. And we'll drop this inside of here. And this is called WP forecast. And here they're breaking on MD, which means as it gets down to a certain pixel width, it'll start stacking underneath instead of going left to right. Pretty simple. And then I'm creating a nav tab in here, which allows me to create the hourly and weekly tab navigation. And I'm using UL in here. And this is all built into Bootstrap. Makes it pretty easy to do. The only thing here that you need to know is that when you make your tab content, your ID here is daily, needs to match this kind of thing up here so that when it clicks on it, it knows which one to display. So you can see I have a hashtag weekly, hashtag daily, and then that knows how to find that ID or that selector in there. And then in here, I'm going to leave these tables in here blank because JavaScript is going to write the data out in rows and columns for me. And we're going to do that from the JavaScript side. Okay. So if we look at what's going on here, hopefully we've done this right. And now we have our kind of navigation here, and we've got our precipitation. So it's filling out really nicely. We just need one more row, and then we're done with the UI. Okay. So the next thing that we have to do is I'm going to create a row, one more row here. And I'm going to put that right underneath this row here, the WP conditions row. And we're going to call this in here, we have a div in here called WP footer, and we're centering the text in here. And inside that has a row and 2 columns, and I've got some URLs in here. You can put whatever content you want in here. It's pretty easy to do. And so let's save that and let's look at that. And you can see now we have this great powered by darksky, which takes us over to the darksky API. And then of course, Coder Foundry. If you want to learn about learning how to code, you can come here and launch your coding career. But again, you can use this to maybe go to your larger portfolio, or it could be whatever you want to do, you know. Just make it your own and own it. And all of this is really responsive, and you can see how where it's stacking here. When it gets small, it'll stack this image underneath it. And then when it's bigger, the cover gets bigger and it looks really nice. So that is the UI. And again, you can get all this from GitHub. So the next thing we want to do is let's look at the JavaScript and let's actually call the APIs and get this thing functional. All right, let's jump into VS Code here. And let's look at what we can do here. So I've got a JS file here called Weather JS, and there's nothing in it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and locate the lat long of the location so that we can pull back the location of the user. Okay, so that should be pretty easy to do. But before we do that, let's set up some constants here that we're going to use. I'm just going to paste these in. And what we're going to do is look up these values for display. And so we're going to have a thing called the weather day, which is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We'll use this in our forecast area. We're also going to use the month, and so we can display the full month when we need to. And then I have these icon value. And this icon value is coming back from darksky API. And so these are currently the types of conditions that will come back from darksky. So they also have a summary, but they say in the documentation says use the icon value to figure out what picture you want to display if you're doing that kind of functionality in your app. And so this is just the icon value, and then we're going to attach that to an actual image and what image to display. But we need to do that first. Okay, now that we've done that, let's look into like how do we get the location from JavaScript, and it should be pretty easy to do. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're just going to write a quick function here called init location, and we're going to call this on the body tag so that every time they start up, the app will locate the user. Okay, takes no parameters, and it just is going to run at startup. So let's add a little comment here, and we're going to find the lat, or latitude, and longitude, or long, of the user's location. Okay, so that's what this function is supposed to do. Now inside of here, this is actually pretty easy to do. Okay, and so I'm just going to do a simple if statement, and I'm going to use something that's built into the browser called Navigator, and I'm going to say dot geolocation. Okay, and it says if, and that's true, do some stuff for me, and I'm going to say navigator dot geolocation get current position and current position, and then I'm going to pass it a callback function, which I'm going to call success. Don't get confused with this. If you haven't seen this before, you can call this whatever you want. And I'm also going to say if it fails, call this function. So if it's successful, call success. If it fails, call fail. Okay. And then else, another kind of standard kind of thing. If something else goes wrong that this doesn't catch, I'm just going to put an alert in here. We could make this nicer here, but that's not really the focus of this tutorial, is how to handle errors. But this does not support geolocation services. So some people have this turned off on their browser for privacy, which is fine. And so we just want to let them know that, hey, if you want to use the weather, we need the location, because lat and long is also required for darksky API to get it going. So the next thing we need to do is write our function success, and this is our callback function. And again, this could have been anything. It's going to take a position. All right, make sure I spell it right. And so this position, what we can do is, here's what we're going to call our two fetch functions. The first one we're going to fetch is the Google API. The other one we're going to fetch is the weather from darksky. Okay. Now, one thing you need to know is you need to add your keys here. Okay. My keys are stored in a separate file, but you need to add your keys to the APIs here. So each API that you have for Google and darksky requires that you go get an API key. You do need to keep these secret because at certain levels of usage, these APIs do cost money. So I located mine in a key.js, and I defined them as constants so that they would be available to all the places where. So what you can do here is I'm going to just put the code right here, and you can say ds key because that's what it's called, and you could define it right here and it would work. Okay. But there's a problem with this. It's going to work for demo purposes, but like, just remember that if someone had this key, they could call your darksky API using your key and run up a bill on you. So you need to secure that, and we're going to address that later in another video. But in general, that's kind of what we want to do here. Okay, so now let's get to the actual calling it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a function. I'm going to call them fetch. And the reason I'm using fetch is because I'm using the actual fetch in JavaScript in here, so I just called it FetchLocation. So FetchLocation will take my Google API key, okay? It's also going to take my lat and long, okay? And this is how you get it. So position is being passed into here, and I'm going to say position coords, which is short for coordinates, dot, and then I'm going to get latitude. Comma, and then I'm going to get the longitude of this, because so it's position dot c coords dot, and then I'm going to get longitude. Okay, and that's the calling or the parameters I'm going to pass to this function. Okay, hopefully I spelled everything right there. Position. Okay. And so that's all I really need to do here. I'm not making the function here. I'm just calling it. All right. And that's my success version. Okay. Pretty simple. I spell function right here. And then I'm going to write my function, which is going to be, it's going to be fail. Okay, so I'm going to add my fail callback here. And all I'm going to do is write another alert in here. So, or what you could do, and I'm going to put this as a comment, as a to-do thing that you could do, is you could fail it over with a known lat long here, and you could default it to your favorite city like Kernersville, North Carolina, the home of Coder Foundry, or you could say, you could just throw an alert. So you could show the weather for a known location, kind of where you're at, or New York, or your favorite city, or whatever you want to do. And you could call fetch weather report and fetch location with a known Latin long. And that should be pretty easy to discover. But for now, we're just going to show an error. Okay, so let's go ahead and write this fetch location. So we've got that done now. Okay, so let's go up here and write another function called fetch location. Okay, and remember that our fetch location does have parameters. Okay, and so what we need to do is pass in our API, and then we need to pass in our latitude and longitude. Okay, so it looks something like this. Right, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut and paste this, save us a little time. All right, and so this fetch location will take an API key, latitude, and a longitude. And now what I need to do is simply call my API from Google. Okay, so I'm going to create a link here, and I'm going to call this Google API link, and this is the link we call. And when you're calling these API services, typically what you're doing is creating a URL that you fashion to call. Okay, and that URL for Google is specific, and this is what it looks like. And this is actually very simple. Okay, so you're going to call maps.googleapis.com/maps/API/geocode.json and then a question mark, and then you pass it these parameters. Okay, now what I'm using here is a template literal, and so these are my values coming in. If you know this, I'm using the tick mark on either side, and now I can pass the parameter latitude in here, comma, the parameter longitude, and then at key, and then I pass my API key right here. Now, what this means is, and this is where I go back to security, is that now my key is being pretty much transmitted across the wire, and anyone could discover this key. And so this is real important that you typically call these types of services from a server environment, and we'll cover that later in a video, but I just want to show you how you would call it. Now, in the case of Google, which is very interesting, is you can go to the Google console, the developer console, and secure it so that only a certain domain or IP address could call this API. And so you can, in the case of Google, broadcast the key over the internet, but you secure it in the developer console to make sure that only your website can use this API key. Now with darksky, that's not the case, and you have to secure it, but we'll go over that later. Okay, now here's what we do to actually get a result back. We use JavaScript fetch, okay, and we pass it this link that we just created. Okay, and this is a pretty simple kind of construct here, and then you say then, okay, say then, and then you have this function you're going to call. All right, and you're going to say response, and what I'm going to do here equal, I am going to then make this function that's inside of here. Okay, so fetch then, and then I'm going to have a catch and everything, and then a then. All right, so inside of here I can say return. Okay, the first thing it does is write a return response.json, and so this is going to get the actual return from Google. Okay, and then you have to do something with it. So then you write another then, and so it says first do this, get the response, then, okay, and we make another variable. We do the same kind of thing here. All right, pretty simple. And then we do something. So we work with the JSON here. So this, what I'm showing you, is how you call APIs in general. I'm using the Google as an example, but you, in general, this is how you do it. And so once you get it, I'm going to have a JSON. All my JSON data is going to be thrown into this variable right here called data. And from here, I can look at the JSON object. Okay, I can look at all the objects that are included in that response from Google. Okay, so let's just do that. So I'm going to set, I'm going to go document dot get element by ID. And if you remember our UI, we had one called location. Okay, and then I'm going to set its inner HTML equal to this. And this is kind of cool. Data, which is this variable that's coming back that was filled up from this response here. This thing, we put it into here, okay? So this holds my objects, and typically these APIs will hold more than one object. They'll hold a collection of objects, and that's the same case here. Those collections in the context of Google is called results. And in the case of reverse geolocation, because this is what I'm calling up here, geocode, I need a certain object in there, and I know what it is because I looked up the doc, so I don't want you to get confused on that. I got 4. Now, what's cool about this is you can get more than one type of object coming back from Google. You can get the street address all the way down to what's called the approximate address. And we're going to use one of the approximate addresses ones. What I advise you to do is go look at the results coming back from the Google Docs page in Developer Console and see the types of data that's coming back. And this just shows you how to walk it. So like data is what was returned to us. Results is an object that's inside of this coming from Google, and 4 references one of the objects that I want to get. And then this is the actual property on the object, which is called formatted address. Okay, and so that's pretty much calling it. Okay, and then what I need to do is I can then catch an error here. So I can say dot catch. And what I want to do here is called error, and I'm using the same kind of format here. Okay, I need to put that in a function. And so this is the object that I'm going to investigate when I get an error. And then I just kind of do that. And then close off my function there. And in here, I'm just going to throw something. So I'm going to say throw, and I'm just going to say sorry. Okay, and I'm going to use a template literal here again. So the tick mark above, underneath the tilde, an error occurred. And then what I can do is space, and I'm going to use the error object to tell me what the error was. I'm going to just write that out to the screen, and that'll come out to my developer console so I can see kind of what happened. So that's it. Now, if I did this right, we've called our first API function using fetch inside of JavaScript. So hopefully that works. And let's check it out here to see if it does. All right, so I'm going to pull this over and show you kind of what's going on here. Hopefully we can refresh this. Oh, yeah, so it didn't work. So what we need to do real quick is we need to call this function on our body tag. Okay, so I forgot that. Let's do that real quick, and then we'll get this working. So you need to call it every single time that it happens. Pretty simple. So we're going to do this on the onload event. On the onload event, call init geolocation. So I'm going to save that. So we need to call our init geolocation in here, and that function calls every time. So when we come over here, you can now look at it, and you can see now what it's done here is it's got Kernersville, North Carolina, 27284 USA. Again, there's a lot of formats that you can choose in here, but that is coming directly from the geolocation services from Google, and that's really cool. So let's do the next step, and let's actually get this functional. Let's get all this weather in here that's real, okay? So let's put this to the side for a second. We'll just go ahead and kill it. And let's get to work. So let's go back to our Weather JS. And what we need to do now is we're going to write another one called the fetch weather report. Okay, but we need to call that in our success function here. So let's go down to our success here. I'm going to call another one. I'm going to write, I'm going to say fetch, and I'm going to call it weather report. And what I'm going to take here is my DS key. DS stands for dark sky. We're using the darksky API. And I'm going to take these same kind of things from here as well here. We'll put this in here. So it takes lat and long and longitude. So latitude and longitude. And that's required to call the DS. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to create another function up here called fetch weather report. Put this at the top. Let's say fetch weather report. And it takes the same signature as the other one, so we're going to call it API key latitude longitude. So put a little comment here. Fetch Google fetch the address, and this is going to fetch the weather. All right, so that's pretty cool, pretty easy to do, and this is going to take the same kind of format. Okay, so we're going to take the exact same format we did before, and we're going to use the fetch functionality built into JavaScript to do this. Okay, now here's a little bit of a wrinkle in this. So what you're going to run into is how do I call this without using a proxy? And the thing is, you can't. So you're going to run into a thing called cores if you do this straight from the front end. And the reason darksky is doing this is because they don't want this called directly from JavaScript, because your key can be in the wild. So they don't allow that, and it's called cross origin. However, there's a couple of services that you can use that are free, and one of them is coresanywhere.herokuapp.com, and you just put this, you tack this onto the front of your API, and it'll work at that point. So this will get it to work. It's not optimal, but it does work this way. Okay, and this is, so we're going to add this URL in front of this URL simply so that we can call the darksky API from JavaScript on the front end, and this is a cores issue. All right, and this resolves that. What we'll do a follow-up is how we can call this with a serverless function, which is how you actually want to do this, but that's going to be out of scope for today. And so in here, we're building the API from darksky here. So it's http://api.darksky.net forecast, and then we're using a temperate literal again. And we're going to take the API key that was passed in / the latitude, comma, the longitude. And that's the format of the URL that darksky is expecting. Then we can have some query parameters. And you just add a question mark, and I'm saying, don't bring back everything. So I'm going to exclude the minutely forecast. And if you don't know this, you can get a by the minute forecast for darksky, which is really, really cool. You also can get alerts like flood watches, inclement weather like tornadoes, that kind of thing. And then there's some flags here as well. And so I'm excluding these from my app. And what that does is means that darksky only has to deliver not as much data, so it makes my app a little bit faster. Okay. And so now that I have my API link, what I can do is write another fetch statement. So I'm going to say fetch, and I'm going to use ds, and I'm going to take my API link, just like I did before, okay? And then I'm going to start writing my then statements. So then fetch this, then, okay? Look at the response. And then I'm going to say return response.json, just like before, exactly like the other one. So this is a very kind of repeatable pattern that you do to call APIs. Then after you get a response, then let's work with the data. We're going to call that data again. You could have called it anything, but we're going to keep it consistent and call it data. And then we need to do some things, okay? Now here we're going to have a lot more work to do because we got a lot of display to do. So before we do that, let's go ahead and write our error condition down here as well, okay? And then we'll come back to this in a second. So let me just write this real quick. Same pattern here. If we run into an error, do some stuff, okay? I did that wrong. You do this. Put this here. Okay. So catch, and we're just going to do throw an error, and we're going to do the same kind of thing. So throw an error. Tell me what the error was. You can make it more descriptive if you want, and you can like look into this and how you want to handle this. All right, but that is the basis for our fetch weather. Now we need to set our values and walk the properties. Now, if you look in Dark Sky API's documentation, you'll realize that it has multiple objects coming back, and some of them are called currently, and some of them are called weekly, minutely, and daily. And so we're going to use the hourly, the daily, and the currently, okay, to get it. So currently is what is the temperature right now at this point in time. The daily will give me for the next 8 days what is the weather forecast, and the hourly says for the next 8 hours what is the forecast, okay? And so all we're going to do now is do a bunch of document.get element by IDs, okay? But first, let's get some information from the API itself. So I'm going to cut and paste these in here, and then I'm going to walk through them, okay? So I'm going to declare a bunch of variables up front here. So I'm going to work with the data. Now in here is a bunch of variables, okay? And now I want you to look at what I'm doing here. So data is the object that we have that comes back from this response. And now we can look at the objects inside the results coming back from Dark Sky. So this is currently, and this is the name of the object in there. And then this object has a property. And you can look at these, it's really well described of all the things that you can get. I'm only getting a few of these things, just a few of them, but there's a lot more information in it. So data.currently.summary, that gives us like, it's cloudy today or partly cloudy with a chance of rain, those kind of things. The temperature, you can imagine what the temperature is. Then the icon. And now we're going to use this to figure out what do I need to show on the screen. What picture do I show? And this is precip probability, or the precipitation probability. You know, and if you're like me, it's like how likely is it going to rain? And so it's currently .precip probability. That's going to come back as a percentage chance of rain. Okay, humidity is the same way. It's the percentage of, on a scale of 1 to 100, what is the humidity? The wind speed, currently .wind speed. Okay. Now, here's the thing that comes back that you'll need to understand about the Dark Sky API is that the time is coming back as something called Unix time. And so we need to do a lot of things around, because it's in this format, to get to the type of information that we want, okay? So what I do is I declare a new data object, and I take the Unix time, multiply it by 1,000, and this gives me my timestamp, okay? Now a timestamp also includes a day. And so what I can do now is I can get the day out of this date, and then I can pass it to WDay. So what that will do, it'll pass it a number between 1 and 7, and based on that, it'll return the day that I want to show, my display value, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. All this is going to return, tsGetDay will return a number between 0 and 7. It's kind of cool. And then I'll return the corresponding display value that I want. The same thing happens here. This month will return 1 through 12. And what I can do in here is I can grab these based on that value, or 0 through 11, January, February, March. Okay, so that works really well. And then finally, I can do a get date, which will get me the day of the month. Using local time, it's a number, so that's in 0, day 1 through 31. Okay, and then that'll give me what day of the month it is. So this will return Monday, August 27th, or something like that. And that's what that does. Okay, so that should be pretty clear, we hope. So let's make sure we got these all semicolon, got our brakes on it. All right, so now the next thing we need to do is go ahead and set our values, and that's pretty much all we need to do. So what I can do is do this. I'm going to just cut and paste these in here, and then I'm going to walk through each one. So again, I want to set it for the current conditions, and I want to say get element ID daytime, enter HTML equal to my forecast date. Okay, this is what I was doing right here, is formatting this forecast date. So I get the day would be Monday, then I get the month would be August in the case of this when I'm recording this, and the day value like 27 or something like that. Then I want to get the summary, which I grabbed from my data set right here. It's just a string, and I put it into these elements. Now, in the case of temperature, I went ahead and rounded the number up because there is a precision value on this, and no one cares if it's 87.38 degrees. They just want to know if it's 87. So I math round it, and then I add this HTML value here, .degree, to give you that kind of circle in there. Okay, and that gives me the degree of the current temperature. Now, what I'm doing here is this is how I'm deciding what image to show. So we need this get icon function. So let's write that real quick so that this will all kind of work, okay? So I'm going to put that underneath my weather here, okay? I think that's a good spot to put it. And I'm going to cut and paste this in because it's really just a long switch statement. And it's going to be called get icon. And all that does is deciding what image do I need to show. So let's put that down here. It's kind of not really relevant to the logic we're doing here, but let me walk through it, okay? So I want to render the correct icon, and so I'm calling it get icon. I pass that string in here, and I'm using that enum, or that constant that I declared up top, to look for it. And so when it finds it, it returns the location to my PNGs. And if you look over here, I've got these images that's in the code here that you can use for your app. And it's just giving me the path to each image. The only thing that's kind of crazy here is that cloudy and partly cloudy day, in my opinion, were the same, and I'm using the same image here, okay? If you wanted to, and so what I did is I had a fall through value here in my case statement that made sure that if it's either one of these values, it will return this mostly sunny PNG, okay? Other than that, I created a sleet, a rain, a sunny day, a cloudy moon, clear moon, and whatever. And in case it doesn't find any of those, it just returns a sunny day. Because even if the weather's not right, we can have a good outlook and it can be sunny, okay? So, so I've done that. I've got a get icon there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to format my precipitation probability. And I simply multiply that by 100 because it's going to be like 0.48. I multiply it by 100 and then put a percent on it so it's a little bit more readable. I did the same thing with humidity here. I rounded it and then multiplied by 100 and gave a percentage. And then the wind speed, I just rounded it up and put MPH in here. I'm going to make a little concession here. They do say in the documentation this is meters per second, but when I did the meters per second conversion, the winds didn't match up with the thing, so I would like to know if that's quite accurate. Sometimes I was getting really large values for the wind speeds, and when I looked outside or walked outside, it wasn't entirely accurate, so I just left it at MPH. You could probably do some investigation in that to see, or maybe send them a note or whatever. But otherwise, it works really well, and it's really cool and really easy to do. So what we should be able to do at this point is see kind of what's going on. And let's look at our UI here. So let's go live and see if it works. Okay, so let's drag it over here, and let's see if it in fact works. Okay, so you can see now that it's 87 degrees, it's mostly cloudy, and it's Wednesday, August 28th. If you're an eagle eye, you notice, and this is taking me 2 days to record. And then this is our partly cloudy with our sunny right there. So it found our right thing. The precipitation chance today is 0, and the humidity is 54%, and the winds are 8 miles per hour. And this is the thing I was talking about. I read through meters per second. And you'd have to multiply this by a value of more than 2, and that would make this 16 miles an hour, and it just doesn't seem right, and maybe I'm wrong about that. If you've done this and you're watching this, leave me something in the comments and tell me kind of what I'm doing wrong there, but I don't think that the data coming back from Sky API is what I thought it was, or I don't know how to convert it or something like that. But anyway, it made more sense that this was 8 miles. That's more accurate when I look outside. Now, one thing I will tell you about this, that I want to tell you a funny story. I was working on this, preparing for this demo, and it was raining like cats and dogs outside. And when I could hear the rain pounding on my roof here as I was recording. And I was working on it, and then suddenly I refreshed the page and it came back with a sunny sign. And I'm like, wow, this thing doesn't work. And slammed my laptop down, went outside, and noticed that the rain had actually stopped within the few minutes between me refreshing the browser. And that's how accurate this Dark Sky API is. It is down to the minute. And that encouraged me that this in fact does is really, really powerful API, the best API out there on the market by far. And it's really cool. Anyway, thought I'd give you that little side nip. If you're testing this and it doesn't look like it's coming back right, you may want to walk outside and look to see if it's in fact raining or sunny or whatever. Okay, so the next thing we have to do is to get these two little pieces done here. And we're going to use a table to do that. So let's put this to the side, and we're almost done. Hang with me, and we've got this squared away, and we'll have WeatherPro complete. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is I'm going to write a couple of functions right in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it render weekly forecast and render daily forecast, okay? So, so I'm going to say render the forecast tabs. And so that's going to be pretty easy to do. So I'm going to copy these in here, and then we're going to write the actual function so you can see kind of how it works. So what I did was I've got these two areas in here, and if you remember going back over here, that I've got these empty tables. Let me get these in here. Let's expand it. So I've got these empty tables right here. Here we go, right here. So I've got these empty tables right here, and what I want to do is write the rows and columns in here. And so I'm going to have a row for each day for the daily, and a row for each day in the weekly, and a row for each hour for the daily forecast. Okay. And so I used a table for that because it's pretty easy to do. Clear console here, and I think let's get to work on that. All right, let's just do that real quick. So I need a render weekly forecast. Okay, so I'm going to put that underneath this code here. So this is my fetch location, and this is my fetch weather. So I'm going to kind of group them up here, just a kind of code organization thing that I do. And I'm just going to render weekly forecast. And so I need a function. And it's render weekly forecast, okay? And it's going to take the parameter data.daily, okay? And so what I'm going to do is rename that for expediency here. I'm going to call it FC data, forecast data, okay? And this is going to be my weekly forecast. And this is a pretty simple thing to do, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write some headers, and this is the header that comes back. So I'm going to declare a variable and set it to some values. And so I'm going to use this table header here, and it's going to be day, conditions, high, and low. Okay, and so that's just a table header in HTML. And then what I want to do is loop over the data and get all the rows that I want. But the first thing I want to do is get a row count. Now, what you don't know is, and what you have to know is that this will return more days than I actually want. And so really what I wanted to do was I just wanted 8 days, okay? And so, or the next 7 days. So I looked at the length of this entire object that's coming back, okay, and got a row count. And so if the row count is greater than 8, that means if more than 8 days come back, what I want to do is set my row count equal to 8. Pretty simple. just so I can restrict the amount of information that's coming back to the screen. Hey, if you want more days, don't do this, pull them all back, don't really care, but I just want to show kind of the next week, all right? The next thing I want to do is I want to write a simple for loop here, and I'm going to start at 0, so I'm going to get the first value, and then I'm going to say I less than row count. As long as it's less than, we're good, okay? So I want to go through 0 to 7, and then I plus plus. So if you know about loops, all that's going to do is loop over this 7 times. All right, and so then what I want to do now is I want to format these rows and then write out my HTML. Pretty simple. Let's go through that. Okay, a couple of functions that I need to do, but it should be pretty easy. So what I did was I did my new date thing again. So I do have data coming back. Remember, we had to do this before. I have to do it again. So dot data, and this is I, which is the object that we want. So this is coming back in multiple rows. So each row will have the date in it, okay? And so it's going to be in the first row, I want the time property multiplied by 1,000 to give me a timestamp, okay? So this, we know these are unique states coming back. Again, we're using the same trick that we used before in the current section where we're calling into that WDay array to get the correct display that we want. So now that we've got it to a timestamp, we get the day and show me the day that's coming back, and then get the data summary at the current row that we're on, and then the same thing here where we're rounding it and getting the temp high, temp low, and then we have it pass all of these values to this render row function, okay? And that is very, very simple. In fact, it's so simple. I'm just going to cut and paste it right here. It's a one-liner. Okay, and so this is going to take the daytime, the summary, the temp high, and the column value 4. I did this so I could use one function to do all this. I could have wrote one for each type of forecast, but the only thing that changed with this fourth column that was a little bit different. So I just call it column value 4 for readability, and I'm going to use this renderFo function for the weekly and the daily forecast. All right, and then I just need a return statement here. And if I spell return right, it'll work. And so that should, in fact, do it. So like, let's look at this and just see if we get this right. Hopefully it works. And we'll pull this over here. Check it out. And look at that. So now we've got our header here. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and this is our summary of the day and the high and the low. So it's a really cool weekly forecast. So one thing left down to do is do this hourly, and let's do that real quick here. Okay, so what I need to do now is, if you look up here, I need this render daily forecast. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and write a function here called render daily forecast. Okay, and it's going to take my thing called fcdata, just like I did before. And then, so what I'm going to do is, it's a little bit different, and that's why they're not in the same function, and a little bit more work because there were some kind of values that I needed, okay? But let's start out here, and I'm going to do the same kind of trick here that I did in the beginning. So one thing I want to do is I want to create my headers, which in this case is time conditions, just like before, but we're using the time now instead of the day value. So I need the AM, PM time. Then I have the temp, which is the temp at that condition, the temperature it will be. And then I just add another column called the precipitation chance. You may want to know if it's going to rain at 4 o'clock or something like that. Okay, I only want to return the next 8 values. I did that too so that the grids would be the same height and those kind of things, and so it makes it nice on the display value. And then I went through a little bit of work here to turn these into a time from the Unix time, and I'm going to just paste that in here so you can kind of see what I had to do. And this is just how it is. I mean, like, there's nothing, another way to do this that I can figure out. So it's the Unix time. It needs to be formatted for display. And so I said, get the hours from this timestamp. Okay. And so this timestamp, well, let me do this too. Sorry. Forgot one other piece here to put in here. Okay. We do need to loop over all of these things. Okay. And let's go here. All right. So we need to loop over the row count, and we just want to get the first 8, and then I grab the timestamp just like I did before. I'm converting this Unix timestamp into a date value that JavaScript can work with. I've got a summary that's equal to 0, a temp value, and a time value. And then I've got my hours that are coming back, and then I just need to, like, hey, if it's over 0 and it's less than 12, the time value equals plus hours. If the hours are less than 12, I need to take 12 away from it, and that's because it's going to come back as military time or 24-hour time clock. And really what I want to know, I want 1 through 12. And here in the US, we don't operate on 24-hour time, and so this will give me 12 p.m. or 12 a.m., something like that, 1 p.m. or 1 a.m. So this is distinguishing between a.m. and p.m., and you had to kind of go through this kind of a little bit of algorithm to figure that out, okay? So now that we've got our time value, we've gone through that, and you can now, we just need to format our string here. So that was pretty easy to do as well. And so again, I'm going through the row that I'm on, and it's the summary, to get the summary for the thing. I'm getting my temp here, and you should have seen this 3 or 4 times now, that we're just rounding it and adding a little kind of thing on the end to tell the little degree little symbol. And then I'm also doing here with the probability, converting that to a percentage. And then I call my render row value and pass all the values in there. And then finally, I just return all of this object to my screen. After I've went through all the row, all of them, and that's it. And so hopefully, if we've done our job, that it'll work here. So let's just see here if that works. And I'll pull this over, and we'll discover it together. Look in here, and so now we have our weekly that we just did, and look at this. Now we've got the hourly going back. And so that is WeatherPro, and that's how it works. So I hope you learned a lot about this. The thing that I want to stress to you going forward is securing your keys. I can't stress that enough. Google does charge, darksky does charge. So you need to secure those, and I'll address that in a little bit later. But for those of you that are very kind of ingenious and you've been in this a lot, you can call this from what's called a serverless function, and then we'll talk about that later. But for now, I hope WeatherPro helps you. I hope you learned about how to use Fetch to call an API. But whatever you do, good luck and keep coding.